Tuesday at 10:30. The sanctity of the brownstone was disturbed by the crack of a shell. And I mean that in the figurative sense. The literal one happened an hour earlier, when Fritz dropped an egg on the kitchen floor, his third in a row. Fritz, our resident culinary maestro, does not drop eggs. He courts them with the kind of finesse Casanova reserved for Venetian heiresses. So when he let one, two, then three of them go to Yoki ruin, I figured either the world was ending or Fritz had a problem. But you don't interrupt Nero Wolfe at 10:30, not unless someone's bleeding on the stoop, or the IRS is threatening to confiscate his orchids. Still, the atmosphere was getting thick to thick for the usual brownstone routine. So I knocked on the door of the plant rooms. Phooey, came the response, which is Wolfing for what do you want? And it had better be urgent. Fritz is dropping eggs, I said, voluntarily. There was silence. Then the whir of the sliding door. As it opened halfway, Wolfe's face round, pink, and already sour appeared in the greenhouse fog. Then he is distracted. See to it. He started to slide the door shut. But I blocked it with the toe of my shoe. Not distracted, I said. Haunted. He's muttering about betrayal. In French. I'd say it's domestic. But we haven't had a guest in 6 days. Wolfe inhaled through his nose like he could sniff the facts right out of my lungs. Then he grunted, nodded once, and slid the door closed. I left him to his orchids and went to investigate the culinary crime scene. Fritz Brenner was standing over the sink, hands buried in a pile of broken eggshells, like a war medic who'd lost the patient. His usually immaculate apron was blotched with runny yolk, and he didn't hear me enter. That's how deep he was in whatever had cracked his usual steel German routine. Did the eggs insult your ancestry? Or are we reenacting Hamlet with breakfast? I asked. He looked up slowly. His face was pale. Archie, I have been betrayed. Now, you need to understand something. Fritz doesn't say betrayed unless he means it. This was a man who once held a grudge against a butcher for overcooking veal in 1982. I pulled out a kitchen stool and sat. Start from the top. Did the duck confit call you names? He didn't smile. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folded letter, and handed it to me. It was handwritten in careful but sterile script. No return address, no name, just a message. You taught me how to slice shallots and how to slit a throat. One was more useful than the other. I'm in town. I remember everything. P. I looked up at him. Old student? I asked. He nodded. More than a student. An apprentice. For 3 years. Then gone. No warning. And now back with veiled threats and a taste for metaphor. He crossed his arms. She was brilliant. Precise. But something was wrong with her. Cold. Like butter out of the fridge. Never warmed. I ignored it. I taught her everything. Maybe too much. There was a knock on the front door. Fritz flinched. I motioned for him to stay put and went to answer it. The woman on the stoop was tall, early 30s, and dressed in the kind of tailored coat that says old money with newer secrets. Her eyes were sharp and grey, like steel that hadn't yet rusted, and she held a bakery box in one hand. Mr. Wolfe? She asked. Wrong shape and about £250 to light. I'm Archie Goodwin. Can I help? She handed me the box. It was warm. I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe. It concerns his chef. Tell him it's a matter of culinary revenge. That got my eyebrow to arch higher than usual. I let her in. 10 minutes later, we were all in the office. Wolfe had emerged from his orchids like an emperor summoned to preside over a local scandal. He remained in his chair, of course, watching the woman like she was a particularly interesting fungus. My name is Persephone Lang, she said. I was once a student of Fritz Brenner. I'm now a chef myself at Le Clocter, the new spot in Soho. Wolfe made a face like she'd said she cooked on hot asphalt. I know your restaurant, he said dryly. They served a lavender foam that tasted like bathwater. Persephone smiled, unoffended. Then I shall spare you the tasting menu. I'm here because someone has been sabotaging me. Recipes altered, staff turned, reviews poisoned. And I believe the culprit may be here. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. In this house, in your kitchen, she said, placing the bakery box on the desk. Inside is an omelette I made, exactly as Fritz taught me, and precisely how it was made the night I nearly killed a food critic with it. The room went silent, even Fritz, standing like a ghost behind the armchair, said nothing. Wolfe glanced at the box, then at me. Archie, he said, open it. I lifted the lid. Inside was an omelette, golden and folded perfectly. With a faint green glimmer inside, Fritz stepped forward, eyes locked on it. That's not tarragon. No, said Persephone. It's monkshood. Wolfe's eyes didn't leave her face. Miss Lang, he said, you have 20 seconds to explain yourself before I call Inspector Kramer and hand you over with garnish. She smiled. I didn't put the monkshood in. I didn't even know it was there, but someone wanted me ruined or worse. I came to you because if anyone can untangle a plate like this, it's you, Mr. Wolfe. She stood, brushed imaginary crumbs from her coat, and headed for the door. I'll be at the Mercer Hotel, room 903. But be quick, I think someone's following me. She left. The silence hung like a dropped curtain. I turned to Wolfe. Well, he shut his eyes, leaned back in the chair, and folded his hands over his belly. I detest monkshood, he muttered, and I detest emotional chefs, but I detest intrigue most of all. Then he opened one eye. Archie, fetch Saul Panzer. I'm not saying the brownstone is a fortress, but it's not far off. You don't waltz in unless invited. You don't linger unless tolerated. And you sure as hell don't disturb the sanctity of the kitchen unless your name is Fritz. Or you have a death wish, which is why, an hour after Persephone Lang dropped her gourmet grenade and vanished into the New York mist, the very air in the place was twitching like it had caught a cold. Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair. He sat in his throne of leather, brow knotted, fingers steepled, breathing slow but loud enough to suggest someone had just lit a trash fire under his chair. Fritz had retreated to the kitchen, where the clang of utensils hitting marble suggested either serious food prep or a reenactment of Macbeth. Saul Panzer showed up 20 minutes after I called. No trench coat, no fedora, just his usual unremarkable self, average height, forgettable face. dressed like a man whose goal in life is to be ignored, which is probably why he was the best operative in the city. "Tell me you didn't drag me here for brunch," he said as he took the red chair. "Something better," I replied. "Attempted sabotage, culinary skullduggery, and a possible poisoning via omelet. Welcome back." He arched a brow and glanced at Wolfe, who gave him the rundown in 27 words. 8 grunts, and a small gesture toward the now closed bakery box on his desk. "She claims she didn't put the monk's hood in the omelet," I added. "Says someone's targeting her. Could be revenge, professional jealousy, or just a Tuesday in Manhattan." Saul nodded once. "You want me to dig?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Miss Lang. Background, recent activity. Associates begin with the restaurant, the clockter, staff, suppliers, clientele." And a sharp buzz interrupted him. The doorbell. Wolfe shut his eyes like the sound physically pained him. I rose. "If it's another chef, I'm demanding hazard pay." The man at the door was tall and looked like he'd just stepped out of a high-end obituary. Charcoal suit, silver temples, waxed mustache, and a stare that said he had 3 lawyers on speed dial. He held a cane more for effect than support and smelled faintly of bay rum and old confidence. "Nero Wolfe?" he asked. "Still not." "That fat," I said. "You're speaking to Archie Goodwin. State your business." He offered a card. Thick, embossed, Victor Arognone, hospitality consultant. "My business," he said, "is protecting culinary institutions from scandal. I represent parties with a financial interest in the clockter and a personal interest in Miss Lang's continued silence." That made my ears perk up. "You're not threatening her, are you?" "Quite the opposite," he said. "I'm here to advise Mr. Wolfe that his involvement is unwise. Miss Lang has misinterpreted recent events dramatically. My clients would prefer she didn't spread stories. Stories like being framed for attempted murder." His mouth twitched. "Exaggerations. She's unstable. Passionate, certainly, but her claims have no merit. And if Mr. Wolfe wishes to maintain his reputation, he'd do well to decline involvement." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small white envelope. "Consider this a gesture of goodwill." Before I could respond, Wolfe's voice boomed from the office. "Bring him in, Archie." Rognone entered like a man used to power meetings on high floors with low stakes. He took one look around the office books, globe, orchid calendar, and dismissed it all. That was his first mistake. Wolfe didn't rise. He didn't even incline his head. "State your purpose." Wolfe said, "I represent a consortium of investors. We've placed significant backing behind Le Clockter. Miss Lang's recent performance, let's say, has raised concerns. She's volatile. This poisoned omelet nonsense is her latest act of sabotage against herself and the restaurant. We're trying to contain the fallout." Wolfe picked up the envelope with 2 fingers and sniffed at it, like it might contain garlic. Then he set it back down, unopened. "I do not respond well to containment," he said, "nor to bribes." I added helpfully. Rognone tilted his head. "Mr. Wolfe, I admire your record, your restraint. Surely you see this is beneath your notice." a hysterical chef, a confused incident, and the culinary world's petty rivalries. Why sully yourself? You mistake me, Wolfe said. It is precisely the pettiness that interests me. Large crimes bore me. The smaller, the more human, the more I wish to understand them. Now tell me, what exactly did Miss Lang do that so imperils your investment? Rognon's face hardened. She threatened to name names. She claimed someone in the our kitchen was trying to kill her or ruin her. Same difference in our world. She named no one, Wolfe said. Yet here you are, preemptively indignant. That caught him. His lips tightened. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, show him out. Rognone stood. You'll regret this. Wolfe closed his eyes. Not nearly as much as you will, sir. After Rognon's shoes stopped echoing down the front steps, I returned to find Wolfe massaging the bridge of his nose with his thumb and forefinger. That was Wolfe's version of pacing a hole into the rug. He's scared, I said. He is, Wolfe replied, and scared men behave rashly. That envelope likely contains 5 figures just shy of insulting. What now? Now, he said. We wait for Saul to return. Then you, Archie, will pay Miss Lang a visit at the Mercer. He paused. Take a good look at her hands. That caught me. Her hands. Yes, Wolfe said. I wish to know if they shake. There's something about the Mercer Hotel that tries very hard not to look like it's trying. All smooth concrete, soft lighting, and stuff that smile like they've taken a vow of aesthetic minimalism. I strolled into the lobby at a little after 5 p.m., wearing my best sport coat and the air of a man too curious for his own good. Persephone Lang was registered under her own name, which told me either she had nothing to hide or she wanted us to think she didn't. I took the elevator to the 9th floor, walked past 2 abstract paintings and a housekeeper who gave me a once-over and a half. Then knocked twice on room 903. She opened the door wearing a robe silk, dove grey, high collar with a face that looked more composed than it had any right to be, considering her omelette had nearly turned a food critic into compost. You're punctual, she said. Habit, I replied. It comes with the job. May I? She stepped aside. The suite was sleek marble, chrome, and a view of downtown like it owed her money. I took in the room, and then, per Wolfe's instructions, took in her hands. No tremble, no fidgeting. They were folded neatly, fingers relaxed. Drink? She asked. I'll pass. I've learned to keep my stomach empty round chefs with enemies. She gave a ghost of a smile, then gestured to a small sitting area. So, she said, what did he say? Will Wolfe take the case? He hasn't turned you down yet, I replied, easing into a leather chair, which is about as close as he gets to a hug. But you're going to have to help us figure out who'd want to serve you a plate of criminal sabotage, I told. You, she said. It could be anyone in that kitchen. Le Clocteau is a hothouse. Every person on staff thinks they're the next culinary messiah, and they all resent that I got the head job. Sounds cozy. Let's narrow it down. Start with the ones you don't trust. She didn't hesitate. Luc Renard, sous chef, French, The kind who thinks he's still working at a Michelin palace in Lyon. Resents me because I didn't train in Europe. Also because I'm not male and didn't sleep my way into the role. Charming, I muttered. That's one. Danica Voss, pâtissière, talented, but bitter. She applied for my position, didn't get it, and has been radiating contempt ever since. She's precise, knows her poison's too used to moonlight as a botanical confectioner. A what now? She made candy with exotic plants. You'd be surprised how often chocolate and danger overlap. Okay, that's two. Keep going. She rose and moved to the minibar. Eduardo met her. He handles purchasing and inventory. Smart, quiet. But last week I caught a few invoices that didn't line up, missing saffron. Misreported truffle quantities. Skimming, maybe. Or maybe someone else was using the supplies. Either way, he didn't like being questioned. I nodded. Three's a good start. Any more? She poured herself a drink. Rognone, your charming consultant. He's more than that. He's the investor's handler. Keeps tabs. Spends more time at the restaurant than the dishwashers. He's the one who brought me in, and the one who would love to see me out. And the way he just appeared at Wolfe's house. That means he's nervous. So either he's trying to cover for someone or himself. She took a sip of her drink. Exactly. I studied her. Do you actually think someone wants you dead? Or just disgraced? She hesitated. I don't know. The critic Montgomery. Plot he didn't die. But if he had eaten more than a bite, he might have. That wasn't accidental. And you don't remember putting monkshood in? I didn't. I cooked that dish myself. I plated it. I served it. And I don't remember the taste being wrong. Wolfe will want to examine the process. The mise en place. The chain of custody. He will, I said, and in the meantime, I'll need to talk to your merry band of culinary conspirators. She handed me a folded piece of paper, names, titles, brief notes. I figured you'd ask. I slipped it into my pocket. One more thing. You said you were followed. She nodded. Twice now. Both times after leaving Le Clocter. I couldn't get a good look, man. Average build, tan coat, dark scarf. Could be someone from the kitchen. Or someone hired by someone from the kitchen. I stood. I'll have our guide tail you tomorrow. If someone's putting heat on you, we want to see who melts first. Back at the brownstone. Wolfe was still planted in his chair. He hadn't moved, might not have blinked. Saul was back, standing by the bookshelves, flipping through a small leather notebook. She's not lying, Saul said, as I walked in. Lang's record is clean, trained under Fritz. Then vanished for a while. Europe, Asia, mostly apprenticeships. Showed up again 5 years ago with technique and scars. Started small. Then exploded with a pop-up called Bitter's Grace. Got Le Clocter 6 months ago. Enemies. Wolfe asked without opening his eyes. She has admirers and competitors. Luc Renard has a rep discipline, ego, short fuse. Danica Voss is quiet poison. And Netta's got a side hustle importing exotic ingredients on the sly. All of them have something to hide. And Rognone, financially clean. But something's off. I've started digging into his private holdings. Wolfe grunted, then turned to me. Archie. She gave me a list, confirmed the personalities. Someone tampered with her station or supplies, and the critic might have been an unfortunate test case. Also, she's not the jumpy type. Hands steady. Fear under control. She's centered. Wolfe said, to centered, curious, Saul closed his notebook. Want me to lean on any of them? No, Wolfe said. Not yet. I moved to the drinks cabinet. We going full formal on this one? Yes. Wolfe's tone was final. Someone has disturbed Fritz, threatened the equilibrium of this house, and used culinary sabotage as a vector for something deeper. This is not just professional envy, it's personal, strategic, and the motive hidden. But soon, Archie, you will find the seams, interview them, dig. Then we shall pull the thread. He opened his eyes, and tell Fritz, he added, to make dinner. I am in no mood to be defeated by an omelet. There's a moment, always, when I step out of the brownstone and into New York's chaos, that I remember why Wolfe hates leaving it. The city talks too loud, walks too fast, and smells like it's got something to hide. That said, it's my turf, and if Wolfe was going to crack this egg without leaving his chair, then I had to do the scrambling. My first stop was Le Clocter. The place didn't just reek of truffle oil and tension, it buzzed with the low-frequency hum you only get when everyone's pretending nothing's wrong while something definitely is. The Magda D tried to stonewall me until I flashed the card Wolfe had designed for just such occasions. It read, Archie Goodwin, confidential assistant to Nero Wolfe. The word confidential usually opened doors, or at least made people too nervous to keep them shut. Downstairs in the kitchen, I met Luc Renard. He stood by a prep station with the posture of a fencing master, tall, coiled, and smug. His knife moved through herbs like it held a grudge. I introduced myself, and he greeted me with the kind of look usually reserved for spoiled dairy. I heard, he said in a clipped French accent, Persephone hires a detective instead of a lawyer. 'Tis dramatique. You'd be surprised how often one is cheaper than the other, I said. You work closely with her. I endure her, he said. She is competent, ambitious. But this kitchen is not a classroom. One must earn respect, meaning she arrived with reputation, not roots. She never paid dues in Paris, in Milan. She skipped the queue. Americans think talent is enough. Someone tried to poison a food critic during her service. That's more than a queue jumper. That's a felony. He turned his knife upside down and scraped the herbs into a silver bowl. If she is being framed, that is her affair. I keep my knives clean. Do you also keep track of her mise en place? He looked up sharply. We all share prep, but each chef guards their station. Her section is hers. Or was. Meaning, after the incident, management reassigned duties, temporary, until the matter is settled. I noted the temporary in his voice sounded like it had air quotes round it. I moved on. Next up, Danica Vos. If Luke was a flaming sword, Danica was ice cool, quiet, efficient. She was building sugar flowers in the pastry alcove, each one so delicate I half suspected she threatened them into blooming. Her fingers moved with absolute certainty. "Danica," I said, "you're not easy to get a read on." "Good," she said, not looking up. "I'm investigating the omelette incident. Wolfe's orders." She dusted a tray with powdered violet, so I assumed. Why would someone frame her? "I was hoping you'd help me answer that." She glanced up, one eyebrow raised. I was next in line for the job. They gave it to her, aesthetics over stability. That sounds like motive. It sounds like a reality. But I would not ruin a service, let alone risk killing a critic, to prove a point. I watched her hands, precise, no tremor. But her tone, a little too flat. "You ever work with monkshood before?" She paused. "In school. Once. We studied toxic botanicals in historical deserts. Never in service." "That seems like something you remember clearly." She met my eyes. "I remember all ingredients that can kill." A shiver crawled up my spine, but not one I could use in court. I thanked her and moved on. Eduardo Meta was next. Inventory and purchasing. He worked from a tiny back office near the walk-in fridge, surrounded by binders, invoices, and the perpetual scent of dry porcini and ambition. He looked up when I knocked, adjusted his round glasses, and offered a polite smile. "You're with Miss Lang, more like she's with us," I said. "Wolfe's taking an interest. That means I ask questions about monkshood. That's the frontrunner. How does monkshood get into a kitchen inventory?" He leaned back. "It doesn't. We don't stock it. Not under that name or any culinary alias." "What about supplies going missing? Chef Lang said you had some irregular invoices." His eyes flicked to a drawer, then back to me. "There was a discrepancy with white truffle paste and some Japanese spices we don't usually order. You file that under theft or creative accounting?" "I filed it under I don't have proof. Could have been a mistake or someone rerouting things." "Anyone have access besides you?" "All senior chefs, Lang included. But only you'd notice the numbers not lining up, correct? And if you pointed fingers, they might point back." He didn't answer. I thanked him and left. Him to his spreadsheets and plausible deniability. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with his eyes closed and his fingers on his stomach like a patient sphinx, digesting both his lunch and the secrets of men. Fritz brought in coffee, and I brought in the facts. I laid it all out. "Luke," I said. "Thinks Lang skipped the line. Ego bruised. Probably wouldn't cry if she vanished. Typical." Wolfe muttered. "Danica's quiet, bitter, and knows her poisons. Claims she wouldn't sabotage a service. But I'm not betting dinner on her honesty. And Meta, numbers don't add up. Could be stealing. Could be covering. Either way, he knows more than he's saying." Wolfe nodded once, then looked to Saul, who had returned mid-afternoon and had his notebook open. "Montgomery plot. The critic," Saul said, "has written scathing things about Ron Yon's earlier ventures. I found a column from 4 years ago where he accused Ron Yon's team of laundering reputation through fake awards." Wolfe said. "So the attempted poisoning may have had dual purpose. Sabotage Lang and silence plot. Lang claims she served the omelette herself," I added. No one else touched the plate, but her prep station may have been compromised. Then Wolfe said, "Someone poisoned the mice and placed not the final product." "Exactly, and Lang didn't notice. Or," I said, "she did and decided to call us instead of the police." Wolfe opened his eyes, "Which means," he said, "we must now determine whether our client is victim, vector, or both." He paused. "Archie, you will return to Le Clocter tomorrow, under a different pretense." "What pretense?" "You shall claim to be writing a piece on kitchen dynamics for Gourmand Weekly. Interview them again. But this time observe where they look, what they handle, how they describe the kitchen when they think they're off the record. And if someone tips, then they will adjust, and we shall note what they adjust." Later that night, after Fritz served a roast chicken so tender it could have been interrogated, Wolfe poured a beer, stared into it, and spoke softly. "Poison is not merely a tool, Archie. It is a mirror. It reflects the cowardice, cunning, or desperation of its user. In this case, I suspect we are dealing with all three." I leaned back. "And what's your read on Lang? She's hiding something." "But so are they all." He sipped. "We must simply determine who had the motive, the access, and the palate to mask a lethal flower inside an omelette." I walked through Le Clocter's back door the next morning with the kind of nonchalance that comes with too much time spent in New York's underbelly. If they were going to assume I was just some freelance writer from Gourmand Weekly, that was their problem, not mine. The last thing I wanted was to play nice. So I wore a disarming smile and a camera my ticket to casual observation and a little more leeway. When it came to poking around inside, the kitchen was a world unto itself, fast, precise, and under the command of an invisible hand. The air hummed with the clash of knives and the sizzle of flames. It looked like something straight out of a high-end food documentary. All high gloss and frenetic motion. Every station was a small fortress, each chef immersed in their own battle against time. And ingredients. I spotted Luc Renard first. His back to the stove, barking orders in French to a line cook whose face was permanently stuck in concentration. I approached slowly, aiming for that easy confidence I had honed over years of floating through tight spots. "Luke, mind if I ask a few questions? For a little piece I'm doing on kitchen dynamics," I said, camera raised. He barely spared me a glance to focus on his task. "Ask quickly, Mr. Goodwin. We are busy." "Well, lucky for you. So am I," I said. I circled around, snapping pictures, capturing the choreography of professional cooking. "What do you think makes a great kitchen, Luke?" "Discipline," he said without missing a beat, his voice cutting through the air. "A perfect kitchen is a kitchen of order. If you are not good at what you do, you will not survive here." "Sure. And what's your take on Persephone Lang?" He shot me a look, one eyebrow raised. "You should ask her, or her fans. I do not concern myself with her." I smiled to myself and moved to the next station. I could feel the edges of tension his reluctance to talk was telling. Maybe he thought his silence would serve as a shield, but it was more of a flag than a defense. Next, I made my way to the pastry section where Danica Voss was busy shaping what looked like delicate sugar sculptures, each one so finely crafted it seemed a shame to eat them. "Danica, you have a second?" I asked, standing beside her. She didn't look up. "Another interview?" "Sure. I'm getting the feel of this place, trying to understand the people behind the food. What's the secret ingredient to working here?" "Discipline," she said, her voice as cold as the sugar she worked with. "And ruthlessness." "Ruthlessness?" She glanced up, her eyes sharp. "You can't make it to the top by being nice. You have to take what you want. And do you think Persephone took something she didn't deserve?" I asked, pushing a little deeper, trying to gauge her reaction. Her expression didn't change, but her hands slowed for just a moment. "Everyone who gets the top job has to take it. She's not the first to come in with a resume that doesn't fit. You know the type, self-made, hungry. But it's a matter of time before they either prove their worth or get crushed under the weight of the kitchen." I snapped a few more pictures. She didn't look bothered by my presence, but there was a tension in her voice, a sharpness that didn't match her serene exterior. It was like she was hiding something, and I was getting closer to peeling back the layers. My next stop was Eduardo. Meta's office. He wasn't hard to find. His little corner was tucked between a walk-in fridge and a wine cellar, surrounded by boxes of ingredients and invoices. It looked like the kind of place where secrets were stored in file folders rather than bottles. "Eduardo," I said, stepping inside. Still keeping the books tight, he looked up, adjusting his glasses with an almost mechanical precision. "Always. Do you have a specific question?" "I've been wondering if someone wanted to use Leclocter's supplies for personal gain. How would they go about it?" He looked uncomfortable, but then his face settled into its usual expression, polite, distant. "You'd need access and a knowledge of the inventory. But why would anyone want to do that? Maybe they were trying to cover their tracks or sabotage something." He didn't react immediately, just continued flipping through a ledger, his finger tracing down a list of orders. "There's nothing irregular in the stock," he said, not meeting my gaze. "Nothing worth mentioning." I leaned in, just enough to show I wasn't buying it. "Really? No extra shipments of saffron or truffles that never quite made it to the kitchen?" Eduardo paused, his hand still on the ledger. Then, slowly, he met my eyes. "There may have been one or two discrepancies. Minor ones." I waited, letting the silence sit like a heavy weight. Finally, he sighed. "But I caught them. No one got away with anything. No one except the person who might have tampered with the supplies. Maybe." I prodded. He didn't answer. By noon, I'd had enough of Leclocter. Everyone was on edge. Everyone practiced in their avoidance. It wasn't hard to tell they all had something to hide. But the real question was what they were trying so hard to cover up. I had no answers, but the pieces were starting to shift into place. I returned to the brownstone just as Saul was walking out the door with a cigarette between his lips. He gave me a nod as I passed him in the hallway. "Nothing too earth-shattering," I said, shrugging out of my coat. "They're all holding something back, but they've all got plausible deniability. Wolfe was seated, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes closed. He hadn't moved. The room was heavy with that stillness that meant he was thinking, calculating. "What's your opinion?" he asked without opening his eyes. "I think someone's playing a long game," I said. "The way they're all circling around each other, making little comments, looking for weaknesses, it's like watching a game of chess. Each one of them is making their moves, trying to get the upper hand." Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and then exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking," he said, finally opening his eyes, "about the subtlety of it all. Whoever did this, they wanted us to play into their hand. They wanted us to see the puzzle pieces, but only in the wrong order." I nodded. "Sounds about right." And Wolfe continued, "We must now watch them more closely. Someone made a misstep yesterday, something subtle. You must observe them again, Archie, but do not confront them. Not yet." I wasn't sure what he meant by misstep, but it was clear I had my work cut out for me. Later that evening, after dinner, a surprisingly light affair, considering the stress of the case, Wolfe sat back in his chair, a slight frown crossing his face. "I have been thinking about the omelet," he said, "the nature of food as a vehicle for deception. It is not just about the taste. It is about the preparation, the careful orchestration. Someone wanted to strike at the heart of something here. The question is, what? Revenge," I said. "But on who? And why?" Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "That is what we must determine, Archie. But remember, whoever is behind this, they are very aware of the rules of the game. They are playing for stakes higher than a mere restaurant review." By the time I left the brownstone the next morning, the air felt heavier than it had the day before. The sun was sluggish in the sky, and the streets seemed to hum with the tension of a city teetering on the edge of something. I had that same feeling that the next move in this game could change everything. Wolfe had been quiet the whole night, mulling over things in his chair like a chess master pondering his next move. But there was an undeniable change in the atmosphere. Something had shifted. The first call came before I even made it to the front door. "Archie, it's Saul." His voice crackled over the line. "We've got a problem." I braced myself. Saul wasn't the type to call for no reason. "What's happened?" I followed up on that little discrepancy in the inventory. "The saffron and truffles thing. Turns out someone made a purchase from an unregistered supplier, and the order was signed off by Eduardo Meta." I stopped dead in my tracks. "Meta? He's been covering his tracks pretty well, hasn't he?" "Yeah." "Well, someone's trying to cover up a bigger mess," Saul said. I dug into the supplier's records. They're not clean. This isn't just a mix-up in the books. Whoever's behind this has been operating under the radar for months. I felt the weight of the information press down on me. "You're telling me Meta's been making deals behind the scenes? Without anyone knowing? That's what it looks like," Saul confirmed. "I'm not saying he's the one who tampered with the omelet, but he's definitely involved in something shady. The problem is, there's a bigger picture here. Someone's pulling strings." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to process. "All right, I'll dig into it. Stay on him. Don't let him know you're onto him." I hung up and started walking. Again, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a food critic anymore. This was about something deeper. Someone inside Le Clocter was running a side operation, and it was clear they were willing to do anything to keep it under wraps. I arrived back at the restaurant around noon. It wasn't busy yet, but I could already see the underlying tension. The air was thick with suspicion, and every glance seemed to carry the weight of unspoken thoughts. The staff moved a little faster, a little sharper, as if they knew something was about to crack. I made my way straight to the kitchen, where I found Luc Renard standing in front of a pot of broth, stirring absent-mindedly. His expression darkened when he saw me approach. "I thought we were done talking, Mr. Goodwin," he said, his tone cold. "Just one more thing," I said, leaning against the counter. "You're in deep with this place, aren't you? Running the kitchen, keeping the team in line. But someone's got their hands in the pie that isn't part of the recipe, and it's starting to smell funny." Luke's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you mean." "Come on, Luke," I pressed. "You know this kitchen better than anyone. Someone's running a side operation. You're a lot smarter than you let on. Who's the one pulling the strings?" He hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tensing. Then, slowly, he wiped his hands on his apron and straightened up. "I told you, I don't concern myself with the other people here. If they're stealing or lying, it's not my problem, right?" I said, giving him a long look. "So you're telling me that if Meta's been making deals with unregistered suppliers and signing off on shady purchases, you wouldn't have noticed?" Luke's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "I don't ask questions I don't want the answers to, Mr. Goodwin. Maybe you should consider doing the same." I didn't like the way he said that. There was something in his voice, a quiet, deliberate tone that felt like a threat. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook. "Funny," I said, "because when someone's running a side operation in a place like this, I start asking questions whether I want to or not." I turned on my heel and walked away before he could say anything else. It wasn't a confession, but it was a clear signal. Luke knew more than he was letting on. I caught up with Eduardo Meta after his shift, outside the restaurant, standing by the back alley door. He looked like a man who had seen better days, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes red-rimmed. He hadn't been sleeping well, and it showed. I could practically smell the stress rolling off him. "Meta," I called out, walking up to him, "I've got a few more questions for you." He stiffened but didn't turn around. "I don't have time for your questions, Goodwin. I've got enough problems." "Problems you're making for yourself?" I asked. "You've been playing fast and loose with the books, haven't you?" He spun around, his face contorted with anger. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," I said, stepping closer, "you've been making deals on the side, haven't you? Unregistered suppliers, questionable invoices. You think I didn't notice?" His eyes darted around, scanning the alley as though looking for an escape. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me, Meta. We both know you've been pocketing something on the side, and I'm betting it's more than just a few extra pounds of truffles." He took a deep breath, his posture crumbling under the pressure. All right, he said, his voice low. What do you want to know? I want to know who you're working with, I said. And I want to know why you've been hiding it. Meta paused for a long moment before answering. I'm just doing what I have to do. There are things happening here, things that I'm not proud of, but I have no choice. If I don't play along, I'll be out of a job. And worse. Worse? I prompted. I can't explain. But I'm into deep, he said, his voice cracking. It's bigger than the restaurant. It's bigger than anything. I'll be the judge of that, I said, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. Tell me who's behind it. He shook his head. I can't. They'll kill me if I do. Before I could press him further, a figure appeared at the end of the alley, tall, imposing, and unmistakably familiar. Saul Panzer. He was in his usual disheveled state, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the scene with practiced suspicion. Saul, I said. Perfect timing. He glanced at Meta, then at me, before muttering under his breath, We've got more trouble than we thought. Meta's face went pale as he backed away, almost tripping over his own feet. I need to go. I'm sorry. I can't do this. He turned and disappeared into the crowd before I could stop him. Damn it, I muttered. He knows more than he's telling. Saul lit a cigarette. We're getting closer, but not close enough. Someone's still pulling the strings, and they're smart. Too smart. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting for me, as usual. In his chair, a cigar dangling from his fingers, his eyes narrowed in thought. Well, he asked, not even bothering with pleasantries. I've got a few pieces, I said. Sitting down opposite him, Luke's covering something. He knows more than he's saying. Meta's running a side operation with unregistered suppliers, and someone's got their hands in the kitchen's finances. I think the poisoning's part of a bigger picture. Wolfe tapped his cigar against the ashtray, his expression unreadable. The picture is beginning to come into focus, but it is still incomplete. We must push harder. I leaned forward. I'm with you, but we're running out of time. Whoever's behind this is getting nervous, and I don't like the feeling that they're watching us. Wolfe's eyes locked onto mine, his expression cold and calculating. Then he said, softly, we must give them something to fear. If there's one thing Nero Wolfe knows, it's how to wait. Not just wait like a normal person, killing time or passing the hours. No, Wolfe waits with purpose, as though the world were a slow-moving chessboard and every move was a calculation. It's a strategy that works mostly because it unnerves the hell out of everyone around him. So, when I walked into the brownstone after my most recent rounds chasing down half-baked leads, listening to lies and dodging people who were more interested in covering their tracks than telling the truth, I found Wolfe exactly where I left him. In his chair, sipping coffee and letting the world come to him. Wolfe, I said, kicking off my shoes as I dropped into the chair opposite him. I've been running in circles. Every lead's a dead end. Every clue seems to lead back to someone who's holding something back. He took a slow sip, then set the cup down carefully. He didn't answer immediately, which was his way of saying that he wasn't quite ready to share his thoughts. That's when I knew he had a plan. and a plan meant the pieces were about to fall into place. "You're frustrated," he said, finally breaking the silence. "It's understandable. But the answer is not to chase every shadow. You must learn to apply pressure, create uncertainty, and wait." I frowned. "Pressure? How?" "You've been playing the role of the investigator too well," he said. "Archie, you need to stop asking questions and start making the answers inevitable. You have been looking at things in the wrong way." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to just, what? Force them into a corner?" His lips curled into a thin smile. "Not force, Archie. Simply nudge them into a position where they have no other option but to reveal themselves. They are aware of you and your questions, and they will adjust, but they will not expect me." That was the thing about Wolfe, as much as I hated to admit it. His intellect was as sharp as a razor blade. The more I thought about his approach, the clearer it became. Everyone was looking for the obvious answer, following the breadcrumbs left behind. But Wolfe didn't deal in breadcrumbs, he dealt in patterns. And once those patterns clicked into place, he would move, and everything would be clear. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering information, more out of habit than necessity. But Wolfe didn't seem anxious to get involved. Instead, he watched. As I worked, his mind clearly elsewhere. At one point, he made a call to Saul. That brief conversation didn't leave much of an impression. But it was clear Wolfe was setting something up. Whatever his plan was, he had no intention of making it known until it was time. Later that evening, Wolfe summoned me to his office, where he was already seated, fingers steepled, eyes closed in concentration. The room had the kind of stillness that made you feel like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. "Sit down, Archie," Wolfe said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We must prepare for the next stage." I lowered myself into the chair, but it wasn't until I saw his eyes flicker open that I realized what was about to happen. Wolfe had a way of pacing his revelations like an orchestra conductor, each moment timed to perfection. "I've been thinking about our suspects," Wolfe began, his voice low and measured. "Luc Renard, Danica Voss, Eduardo Meta, and even Persephone Lang. Each of them has a motive, a reason to want this restaurant's position to shift. They have ambition, but ambition alone is not enough to explain the sabotage we are seeing. No, Archie, there is more at play here. Much more." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "You think they're all involved somehow?" "Not directly," Wolfe replied, leaning forward slightly. "But they are all connected, whether they know it or not. And someone among them has a secret powerful enough to manipulate the entire operation. We need to provoke that secret, and once we do, the pieces will fall into place. So, what's the plan?" I asked, leaning forward, my curiosity piqued. "We will apply pressure where it is least expected," Wolfe said, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "We must push them into a situation where they are forced to confront the truth. We will let them think they are ahead, but in truth, we are setting the stage for their eventual downfall." The plan, as Wolfe outlined it, was simple but effective. We would wait for the right moment when the suspects believed they had successfully deflected suspicion from themselves, and we would exploit that moment. Wolfe would remain the calm center of it all, directing the action from his chair as usual, while I would go out into the field and collect the final bits of information. That would complete the puzzle. The next day, I met with Saul at the cafe on Fifth Avenue. His usually disheveled appearance was even more so, the stress of the last few days taking its toll. But despite the weariness in his face, his eyes were sharp, focused. "I've been digging," he said, as we sat down. "Got a few things on Meta. Turns out he's been making some very interesting financial moves lately, not just with suppliers, but with some very high-profile clients. Someone's been laundering money through this restaurant." I leaned in closer, narrowing my eyes. "Laundering money? Are we talking big-time criminal activity here?" Saul nodded. "Big time. Whoever's been pulling the strings has access to major resources, and they're using Le Clocter as a front." I sat back, absorbing the information. This was bigger than I thought, much bigger. But the real question was who the mastermind was. "I don't have a name yet," Saul continued, "but I'll keep digging. It's just a matter of time." "Good," I said, slamming my fist lightly on the table. "We're getting close, but we need to flush this person out, and soon." As the week wore on, Wolfe continued to play his role as the invisible hand behind the curtain. He set up a series of meetings with various people connected to the restaurant, investors, suppliers, even some former employees, and made it clear that the stakes were higher than they'd realized. We were closing in on the truth, but every time we got close, the mastermind seemed to slip just out of reach. It wasn't until a late-night meeting that Wolfe finally revealed the last piece of the puzzle. "I've been thinking," he said, as I sat across from him in the office, watching him, "about the omelet." "Not the omelet again," I groaned. "You're telling me there's something about that breakfast that we missed?" Wolfe's eyes twinkled. "Yes, Archie. That omelet is the key to it all. It wasn't the dish itself that was significant, it was the timing. The timing of its creation and the way it was prepared. Whoever orchestrated this plot used that particular moment to cover their tracks, to distract us while they worked behind the scenes." I leaned in, staring at Wolfe. "So, the omelet wasn't the target?" "No," he said slowly. "It was a diversion. The true crime was much more subtle, much more cunning. It's about the manipulation of the restaurant's operations, its finances, its supply chain, and the one who would profit from its collapse." I blinked, taking it all in. "So, who's the mastermind?" Wolfe leaned back in his chair, the corners of his lips curling into a smile. "You've already met them, Archie. The answer has been in front of us the entire time. It's someone who has everything to gain and everything to lose. Someone with the motive, the means, and the opportunity to orchestrate this entire affair." I could feel the walls of the puzzle closing in around me. "Who is it?" Wolfe's smile deepened. "Patience, Archie. We're almost there." The day arrived sooner than I expected when it became painfully clear that no more waiting was necessary. Nero Wolfe had been patient, but now the time for subtlety was over. I could feel it in the air. The tension was palpable, both in the brownstone and in the city beyond. It was time for the game to be called, and the pieces were finally in place. Wolfe had summoned the players to the office. Luc Renard, Eduardo Meta, Danica Voss, and Persephone Lang. Each one had been carefully observed. Each one had their place in this unfolding drama. And now it was time to expose them, piece by piece. For once, it wasn't just about solving the crime, it was about revealing the hidden forces at play. And who, exactly, had been behind it all. I was sitting in my usual spot across from Wolfe, watching the door as the suspects began to trickle in. First, Luc Renard arrived, looking as calm as ever, though the sharpness in his eyes betrayed his unease. His usual confidence was wearing thin, and he knew, as I did, that this was the moment when everything would be revealed. He took his seat, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Next came Danica Voss, her air of aloofness barely masking the sharpness beneath. She was dressed in black, and her movements were precise, almost too precise, as if she were rehearsing each step. She gave me a brief nod, her eyes calculating, and then took a seat next to Luc, folding her arms over her chest as though to ward off any prying eyes. Eduardo Meta walked in last, his face a mask of tension. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and the weight of the situation had clearly caught up with him. He barely acknowledged anyone in the room, his eyes darting nervously from one person to the next. The moment he took a seat, I could tell he was already preparing for whatever might come. Finally, there was Persephone Lang. She had been sitting quietly in the background for most of this ordeal, but her presence had always been felt, with a subtle smile playing on her lips. She entered the room with a level of poise and confidence that almost felt like a challenge to the rest of the room. She didn't take a seat at first. Instead, she stood by the window, arms crossed, as if sizing up the situation. Her gaze flicked from person to person, and I could see her making mental notes, strategizing for what was to come. Wolfe didn't acknowledge anyone directly at first. He simply sat in his chair, looking at them all in turn with his usual inscrutable expression. There was no movement for a long, drawn-out minute, the kind of pause that makes the air in a room feel thick. I could practically hear the wheels in his head turning. Then, finally, Wolfe spoke. "I assume you are all aware of the reason for our gathering," he said, his voice calm and measured, but with that underlying authority that always made people sit a little straighter. Luc Renard shifted slightly in his chair. "I trust you've figured out whatever it is you think we've done," he said, his voice tinged with disdain. "Indeed," Wolfe replied, unfazed, "but I have yet to hear it from your own lips. I find it instructive when those involved tell their stories." Luc's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Wolfe continued. "There are two key points that need addressing. First, the tampering with the restaurant's operations, the irregularities with suppliers, the shifting of accounts, and the diversion of funds. Second, the motive behind this sabotage. We know there was more at play here than simple greed. Someone sought more than just profit. They wanted to see something destroyed." The room was silent. I could see the tension in their faces, but none of them spoke up. It was as though they were waiting for Wolfe to make the first move. I could feel the pressure mounting, Wolfe's eyes shifted from one suspect to the next. And then he spoke again, his voice laced with a quiet precision. "Luc Renard," he began, focusing his gaze on the chef. "You are the key player in this establishment's operations. You know every inch of this restaurant's inner workings. Your expertise is what keeps the kitchen running, and yet you are not innocent." Luke stiffened, but his face remained impassive. "I've done nothing wrong." "This is madness, really." Wolfe leaned forward. "I find that hard to believe. You, who control the very heart of the Cloctor's operations, have had a hand in manipulating its financials. You're no stranger to side dealings, are you? You know how to hide things, how to cover up a small mistake with a much bigger one." Luke's jaw clenched. "You're grasping at straws, Wolfe. I'm a chef. I make food. That's all." Wolfe's eyes were cold, but he remained calm. "And yet, it is your hand that guides the flow of money, the procurement of goods, and the direction of every meal served. A chef is an artist, yes, but you are also a businessman. And business is what has gotten you into trouble." Luke was silent for a long moment. His gaze shifted away from Wolfe, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Wolfe was right, and it was clear Luke knew it. Wolfe turned his attention to the next person in line, Eduardo Meta, Mr. Meta. Wolfe said, his tone cool and methodical, "You are the one who signed off on these side deals. These unregistered purchases. You made the arrangements with the suppliers, and you pocketed the profits. But I suspect you were not acting on your own initiative." Meta looked uncomfortable, his hands twitching at his sides. I did what I had to do. The restaurant needed the extra money, and I thought it was just a temporary thing. But things got out of hand." "Out of hand," Wolfe repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Tell me, Mr. Meta, did you act out of necessity? Or was there someone guiding you, someone who needed you to do this? Someone who stood to gain more than just financial profit?" Meta's eyes darted nervously to the others, but no one said a word. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy with unspoken truths. Then Wolfe shifted his gaze to Danica Voss. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice as sharp as ever, "you are the key investor here, but you've been more than just a financial backer. You've been too involved in the day-to-day operations of Le Cloctor for someone in your position." Wide Danica didn't flinch, but there was a brief flicker of something in her eyes. "I'm an investor, Wolfe. I have a stake in this." "Why wouldn't I be involved?" "Because," Wolfe continued, his gaze never wavering, "there's something more at play here. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes, haven't you? You've been manipulating the restaurant's operations in order to push someone else out, someone you felt was a threat to your control." Danica's lips tightened, but she didn't answer. "And lastly," Wolfe said, his eyes now fixed on Persephone Lang, "you've been watching all of this from the shadows. You've been playing the role of the observer, quietly calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. But your time has come." Persephone's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're very good at this, Wolfe, but you're still not seeing the full picture." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "I'm quite certain I'm seeing everything I need to see." Persephone stood up, walking slowly to the window. "You see, Nero," she said, her voice soft and deliberate, "you've been circling around the truth for quite some time now. But there's one thing you've missed, one person you haven't properly considered." Wolfe didn't say a word, but I could feel the tension rising in the room. The game was almost over. Persephone turned back to face us, her eyes gleaming, with the satisfaction of someone who knew they held the upper hand. It was never about the money, or the power, or the restaurant. It was about control. I wanted control of Le Clocter, and I knew the only way to get it was to eliminate the one person who stood in my way. Eduardo, Luke, Danica were all just pawns in my game. A cold smile spread across Wolfe's face. "So, you were the one behind it all?" Persephone didn't flinch. "I don't just want control of the restaurant, Wolfe. I want control of everything. And if that meant pushing everyone else to the brink, then so be it." The room seemed to hold its breath as Persephone Lang's words hung in the air. She'd just admitted to being the one pulling the strings all along, the mastermind behind the sabotage at Le Clocter. But even in the heat of the moment, she wasn't done. There was a confident coolness about her poise that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. It was as if she expected the final act of this drama to go according to her plan. No matter how we felt about it, for a long moment, the others sat in silence. I could practically hear their thoughts, all of them reeling from the revelation. Luke Renard's face had gone pale, his usual arrogance nowhere to be found. Eduardo Meta, who had been twitching in his chair all evening, seemed to be in shock, unable to find the words. Danica Voss, on the other hand, was silent but calculating. She wasn't about to give Persephone the satisfaction of an emotional outburst. Wolfe, of course, was as composed as ever. His fingers were steepled, his eyes never leaving Persephone, as if waiting for her to make the next move. "I must say, Miss Lang," Wolfe said slowly, his voice calm and controlled, "you've shown considerable ingenuity. It takes a certain kind of person to orchestrate something as complex as this, to manipulate people and circumstances so precisely. But I believe you've underestimated one thing." Her lips curled into a smile, but there was no humor in it. "What's that?" "Wolfe, you've underestimated me." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You see, Miss Lang, you didn't just destroy a restaurant. You didn't just play with money or people's careers. No. You played with something much more dangerous, the reputations and lives of everyone here." I could see that Persephone wasn't rattled. She might have been caught, but I got the feeling she had a backup plan, some final card up her sleeve. It was the kind of arrogance you saw in people who believed they could talk their way out of anything. "You still don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice low, almost pitying. "This was never about the restaurant or the money. It was about power, pure and simple. I was going to get it, one way or another." "You've said that already," Wolfe replied, his tone cutting through the tension like a knife. "And I'm sure you think you've outsmarted everyone in this room. But in the end, it was your greed that exposed you. Not just your greed for power, but your greed for recognition. You wanted it all: control, wealth, fame, and you thought you could take it all by eliminating your competitors. But there's one thing you didn't account for. Persephone raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Me? I couldn't help but smirk. Wolfe was never one to mince words, and in his own quiet, deliberate way, he was delivering the knockout punch. "I've been watching you, Miss Lang," Wolfe continued, his voice still as calm as a river, though it carried the weight of truth. "You made one crucial mistake, one that many people like you make. You overestimated your ability to control others. You thought you could push your pawns around without consequences. But you failed to realize that the real game was being played by someone who never moved a muscle." Persephone's confident mask faltered just a touch, but she quickly regained her composure. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" "I mean," Wolfe said, leaning back in his chair, "that while you were orchestrating your little scheme, you made one critical error. You didn't account for the fact that I would be watching." The room seemed to tense even further, and I could see the gears turning in the minds of the others. They weren't quite there yet, but the pieces were starting to click together. "I never took my eye off you, Miss Lang," Wolfe continued. "While you were busy maneuvering behind the scenes, I was waiting for the moment when you'd slip up. And slip up you did." There was a pause. Then Wolfe's eyes flashed. "You thought you were being clever with the money transfers, with the untraceable accounts. But you left one very important trail behind, one that led straight back to you." Persephone's eyes widened for just a split second, and that was all Wolfe needed. He had her now. "The final piece of the puzzle," Wolfe said, "was the omelet." Persephone blinked, her composure starting to crack. "The omelet? That's what this is all about?" "You see," Wolfe said, "it wasn't just about the restaurant or the sabotage of its operations. The omelet was the key moment when it was served. You were hoping for a distraction, a diversion to cover your tracks while the real work was being done, but you underestimated the significance of it. That omelet was prepared at exactly the right time for me to notice something out of place." Persephone's gaze shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twitching at her sides. It was obvious she hadn't expected Wolfe to catch on to that. "Do you remember the exact moment the omelet was served, Miss Lang?" Wolfe asked, his voice almost too soft, like he was savoring her discomfort. Her mouth opened and closed as if she were about to say something, but no words came. It was like she couldn't quite process the connection. "I was watching carefully," Wolfe continued, "and I saw the precise moment when your eyes flickered toward the kitchen. That was when I realized you were more involved in this than you let on. You were the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, manipulating your fellow investors and employees." Persephone's jaw tightened, and she shot a glance at the others. But none of them spoke. They were silent witnesses to their own unraveling. "You thought you could play them all, Miss Lang," Wolfe said, his voice sharper now. "But in the end, it was you who was played. You made a fatal mistake. You believed you were smarter than everyone in the room. And you weren't till you weren't." There was a moment of dead silence as Wolfe let his words sink in. Then he shifted his gaze to each of the other suspects. "In turn, Luc Renard," he said, his tone now more pointed. You thought your culinary expertise would shield you from suspicion, but you were as complicit as anyone else. Eduardo Meta. You thought you could hide behind your financial transactions, but in the end, it was your greed that led you straight to the person pulling the strings. Wolfe's eyes shifted to Danica. Voss, and you, Miss Voss, were too eager to play the role of the innocent investor. But in truth, you were just another pawn in Persephone's game. Finally, Wolfe turned to face the others again, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. And now, we arrive at the inevitable conclusion. Persephone Lang's expression faltered, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. The woman who had been so calm and controlled through this entire process was now visibly shaken. Wolfe stood up slowly, his chair creaking beneath him. He walked toward the desk, his every movement calculated and deliberate. You will leave. Now, Miss Lang, he said, his voice cold as ice, and you will do so quietly. Because if you attempt to resist, you will have me to deal with. The law may be lenient on some things, but not on the things you've done. And I will make sure that you pay the price for your actions. Persephone opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there for a long moment, looking at Wolfe, then at the others. Finally, she turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking on the floor with an almost defiant rhythm. And just like that, the case was closed. The room remained silent for a long time after Persephone left, and I could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. It wasn't triumph or satisfaction, it was the quiet certainty that justice had been served and the game had come to its inevitable conclusion. Wolfe sat back down in his chair, his hands once again resting lightly on the arms. He didn't say anything for a while, simply observing the silence. "I told you, Archie," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "It was always about control, and now she has none." I nodded, but I didn't say anything. The moment felt heavy enough without the need for words. As usual, Wolfe had played the long game and won. The quiet after the storm was always the most telling. The final denouement of a case was rarely celebrated, at least not in the way other people might think. For us, it was simply the return to routine. Wolfe back at his chair, the house once again in its calm state, the ever-present smell of orchids hanging in the air. If anything, the weight of what had just happened was heavier in its silence. Wolfe had won, yet no one felt like applauding. I stood near the door, watching the last of the tension evaporate as the others, our former suspects, drifted away, murmuring under their breath. Luc Renard looked like he'd just been hit by a freight train, still trying to piece together how he'd been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Eduardo Meta had a look of grim acceptance on his face, like he knew the jig was up but wasn't entirely sure why he'd been caught in the first place. Danica Voss, she was the least shaken of them all, but then she wasn't really the one Wolfe had been after. She had been just another player in Persephone Lang's game. The door closed behind the last of them, and the silence settled over the brownstone once again. It was just Wolfe and me now. I don't know why I always expected something more, some kind of victory parade or grand moment of triumph. But Wolfe as usual, was unmoved by anything as petty as satisfaction. He hadn't said a word since Persephone had left, his mind already in the next stage of whatever he was planning. I, on the other hand, was trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. "So, that's that, huh?" I said, breaking the silence. "We're done." Wolfe didn't look at me, not immediately, but after a long, measured pause, he gave a small nod. "Yes, Archie, for now." "For now?" I repeated, my brow furrowing. I'd been around Wolfe long enough to know there was always something lurking beneath the surface of his words. "You're telling me you've got some other angle we haven't seen yet?" "No, Archie." He finally turned his eyes toward me. "But the matter of justice never truly ends. It is not a single, decisive event. It is a chain, a never-ending series of consequences." I was about to ask him to elaborate, but before I could, Fritz entered with a tray of food nothing fancy, just the usual, a couple of thick-cut steaks, a side of potatoes, and, of course, a few sprigs of parsley for garnish, which Wolfe never touched. He sniffed the air and didn't seem to care for the smell of the potatoes at all. But when Fritz set the steaks down in front of him, his demeanor changed completely. "Ah," Wolfe murmured, as if the sight of a perfectly cooked steak was the only thing in the world that mattered. A steak. Now, that is a form of justice I can get behind. Fritz smiled at his employer's predictable enthusiasm and retreated into the kitchen. The door clicked shut behind him, and Wolfe speared his fork into the tender meat, completely ignoring me as I sat across from him. I didn't mind. I knew better than to interrupt Wolfe when he was eating. But it wasn't just the food that held his attention. It was the act of consuming, the ritual of it, that allowed him to truly center himself. It was when he finished his first bite that he finally looked up at me again. "Would you like to know the real reason I took this case?" Wolfe asked, his voice softer now, less formal. It was not simply to investigate a sabotage, nor was it because I found the idea of a French restaurant in disarray intriguing. No, Archie. It was because of the omelet. I leaned forward, genuinely curious. "The omelet? You're still on about that?" Wolfe gave a small smile, his lips curving, just enough to show that there was more to this than just his usual obsession with food. "You see, Archie, food, in its many forms, is one of the simplest and purest expressions of human intention. Every dish tells a story of where it comes from, of who prepared it, and most importantly, of what it represents." I crossed my arms, trying to make sense of it. "Okay, I'm listening, but you'll have to explain this one a bit more, because I'm not following." "The omelet, Archie," Wolfe said, his gaze distant now, as if he was looking beyond the room, into some far-off place of thought, was not just a meal. It was a symbol, a test, a representation of the intentions behind the actions at Le Clocte. I raised an eyebrow. "A test? You're telling me that the omelet was some kind of psychological test?" "Yes, exactly." Wolfe's tone was unexpectedly patient. When it was served, it was the point at which I realized that everything had been carefully arranged to distract from a deeper manipulation. The very moment when the omelet was placed in front of me, I understood the true nature of the plot. I still didn't get it. But I could see that Wolfe wasn't going to leave me hanging. So I let him finish. The omelette was a way for Persephone Lang to manipulate the narrative. Wolfe continued. It was her way of lulling me into thinking she was simply a victim of circumstance, that she was just another player in the chaos of the restaurant world. But she underestimated me. She didn't realize that I would see through the surface-level charm and recognize that every detail was orchestrated. I sat back in my chair, finally starting to understand the depth of Wolfe's thinking. So, you weren't just investigating sabotage at a restaurant. You were investigating the human psyche, the way people use food, status, and manipulation to control others. Wolfe gave me a rare look of approval. Precisely, Archie. You've caught up at last. I leaned back, letting the revelation settle. There were moments when Wolfe's insight was almost too much to comprehend. But that was the beauty of it. He didn't just solve crimes, he peeled back the layers of human nature, revealing the darker impulses beneath. But it wasn't just about food. It was about control. The same control that had led Persephone Lang to manipulate everyone around her, thinking she was the one pulling the strings. And it was that same control that Wolfe had used to unravel her web of lies. I'm still trying to get my head around all of this, I admitted. But you were right. She was always playing for power. And the omelette, that was just one more move in her game. Wolfe nodded slowly, his fork cutting into his steak with measured precision. Yes, Archie. And in the end, it was a simple meal that allowed me to see through her facade. It is a reminder that, in the end, no one escapes the consequences of their actions, not even those who think they have it all under control. I nodded, digesting both the food and the lesson. And with that, I knew the case was done. There was no more need for words, no more need for explanations. The brownstone was still. Wolfe was content, and I had my dinner. The rest Persephone's game, the sabotage, the lies were all neatly put to bed. Justice had been served, but there would always be something more lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the next challenge. I picked up my own fork, ready to join Wolfe in the quiet act of eating. And as the door to the kitchen swung open again, and Fritz stepped out to refill Wolfe's glass of wine, I couldn't help but feel that, despite everything, some things would never change. The case was over. The omelette had been served, and now dinner would continue. The days after Persephone Lang's departure from the brownstone were quiet, almost eerily so. For Wolfe, it was just another case closed, a matter of logic and deduction. One puzzle solved and on to the next. But for me, it felt like a lingering taste I couldn't quite shake off. I couldn't help but wonder how much of this was personal for him. How much of it was about more than just solving a crime, about more than serving justice. Maybe it was about revealing the darker impulses lurking beneath the surface of the people he encountered, and, of course, enjoying his steak. The last few weeks had been a lesson in human nature, how easily people could be manipulated, how those who thought they had control could be undone by a simple mistake. Persephone Lang's obsession with power Her manipulation of everyone around her had finally been unraveled. But even in the aftermath, there were still shadows of doubt hanging over me. Was Wolfe always that sure of himself? Could I ever understand the intricate way his mind worked? The strategy and patience that allowed him to dismantle people like Persephone so effortlessly? It had been years since I'd first started working with him, but every case still left me in awe of his genius. I hadn't spoken to him about it much, but there was something in his eyes that told me this case had been different. Maybe it was the weight of the stakes. Maybe it was the complexity of the people involved. But whatever it was, Wolfe had seen something I hadn't, and that was the nature of the work we did. Sometimes the real story was buried so deep that even the most observant of us could miss it. The afternoon after the case was wrapped up, Wolfe was seated at his desk, flipping through a book as if nothing had changed. The house was quiet, the usual hum of activity around the brownstone subdued. I watched him for a moment, then cleared my throat. "Wolfe," I began, "you've been a bit quiet lately. Anything on your mind?" He didn't look up from his book, but I could tell he had heard me. "It is true that I do not find myself filled with any particular desire for reflection, Archie, but I have been thinking about one thing." I raised an eyebrow. "One thing? What's that?" Wolfe finally looked up, his eyes sharp but thoughtful. "Power, and the way it shifts, like a tide. People like Miss Lang think they can control it, bend it to their will. But in the end, it always comes back to the same thing." I leaned back in my chair, intrigued. "What's that?" "Appetite," he said simply. "The desire for more. More wealth, more influence, more control. It drives people to do unspeakable things. But it is not just power over others they seek. It is power over themselves, their own actions, their own desires. And that is a far more dangerous thing." I nodded, digesting the thought. It made sense. In the end, it wasn't about the restaurant or the money. It had been about Persephone Lang trying to control everything around her, including herself. Her need to bend others to her will had become her downfall. "You're right," I said after a beat. She thought she was playing a game. She thought she could win. But she didn't realize she was only ever one move away from losing it all. Wolfe nodded again, his lips curling slightly. "It's a shame, really. She was talented. But that very talent was her undoing. She couldn't help herself. Not when the stakes were this high." The conversation lulled into silence. Wolfe's reflection wasn't the kind that demanded answers, but it lingered like the quiet after a storm. I couldn't say I was entirely satisfied with the closure of the case. There was still a sense of unfinished business, like something just out of reach. As if sensing my thoughts, Wolfe spoke again, his voice thoughtful but unyielding. "There are no guarantees in this world, Archie. No assurances that people will learn from their mistakes. But what matters is that we do our part, that we offer some semblance of justice, however imperfect." I let the words sink in. Wolfe wasn't one for moralizing, but there was something in the way he spoke that made it clear he had a deeper understanding of the human condition than most could ever hope to achieve. "Yeah," I said quietly, looking around the familiar comforting interior of the brownstone. I guess that's all we can do. We do what we can. And let the chips fall where they may. Wolfe didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. It was late in the evening when Fritz appeared with another tray of food. This time bringing out a simple dish of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and, as always, a pot of coffee. The familiar, comforting smells filled the air, and for a moment, I let the events of the past weeks fade into the background. It was as if the brownstone was returning to its natural state, quiet, calm, and undisturbed by the chaos of the outside world. I knew Wolfe was still thinking about the case. Even if he wasn't showing it, that was the way he operated. He didn't need to talk about it to understand it. It was all there, in his mind, already solved, already compartmentalized. But as I sat there, watching him sip his coffee, I couldn't help but feel a tinge of admiration. The man was a genius, no doubt about it. And while I might never fully understand how he did it, I knew one thing for certain. Wolfe's mind was always at work, always 10 steps ahead. As the evening wore on and the shadows outside grew longer, I found myself contemplating the nature of the world Wolfe had just peeled back, layer by layer. People, with all their schemes and desires, all their illusions of control, were fragile things. And no matter how hard they tried, they could never fully escape the consequences of their actions. In the end, it wasn't just about solving the case, it was about understanding the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface. Wolfe had done that, as he always did. He had seen through the lies, exposed the manipulations, and delivered a kind of justice that was more satisfying than any courtroom victory. I leaned back in my chair, stretching, letting the comfort of the brownstone sink in. There was no more work to be done, no more mysteries to solve for the moment. For now, the world was right. And as Fritz quietly cleaned up, his footsteps muffled on the floor, I looked across at Wolfe. He hadn't said much, but then again, he didn't need to. He was the master of his domain, the king of his world, and, for the time being, at least, that was all that mattered. The case was closed. The omelette was a distant memory, and in the quiet of the brownstone, we moved on until the next case, the next mystery, and the next bite of justice.